Thank you very much for joining. Most of you know most of the people on this call today, but we will introduce ourselves briefly. Declan Kearney is my name. I'm the founder of DCG. Set the business up a couple of years ago in Singapore, now based back in Europe. We run these executive forums typically monthly, probably 8 or 9 every year. So delighted to have a number of you joining today to talk about the hot topic of digital retail media. We shall move straight to introductions, and then I'll give a little bit of housekeeping. Well, if we go around the top, Colin, would you introduce yourself? Again, you guys don't need much introduction, but go for it.
I'm Colin Lewis. I'm a career marketer, and I've got a lot of deep domain expertise in e-commerce marketplaces and retail media. And I've created, I think, 7 best practice reports so far on retail media in the last few years, plus 2 or 3 courses. And I'm dealing with big retailers in Europe and with brands in Europe, just purely talking about retail media at the moment.
Excellent. Gregor. Oh, Gregor, your audio is not working too well.
You had the Darth Vader filter on.
He has. Chris, why don't you introduce yourself? Come back to Gregor in a moment.
Yeah, so I'm Chris Perry. I'm the Chief Learning Officer and co-founder at firstMovr. We're a satellite center of excellence for CPGs, FMCGs for e-commerce education, training, certification, consulting. And I got the honor of working with Declan back at Edge in our past. So we fought in the trenches together, but prior to that led e-commerce at 3 different CPGs and have seen the entire evolution with my hands on the retail media spend and fighting for that spend and then trying to optimize that spend. And so I have a lot of heart for this topic and excited to join the forum lineup here.
Brilliant. Gregor, shall we test your audio again? Oh no, you're sounding like Darth Vader. You might reconnect. Yeah. Okay, great. And I see Neil has joined as well. Very welcome, Neil. Brilliant. So today we are very much focused on digital retail media. I hope you're not tired of the topic. It's so topical that there may be a bit of fatigue, even though it is so important to all of your strategies. We are going to consider the basics, flattening the funnel, talk about incrementality, metrics that matter. And as with all forums, DCG forums, we really aim to be having a dialogue halfway through the session. So 25 minutes from now, ideally, we're having a very healthy dialogue so that we're not just speaking to you. A little bit of housekeeping, a little bit of context. Again, a number of you have not joined our forums before. DCG is an independent digital commerce capability benchmarking business, and we partner with global consumer brand manufacturers. The purpose of these forums are to share in best practice and to bring a level of collaboration to the industry. There are lots of forums, lots of communities. We feel like we're not competing. Chris and I co-host our own forums and do lots of series. Our take is similar to Chris's in that we like to understand and take from the market what's happening, help to inspire people. And we've brought a lot of you together in terms of non-competing category partnerships as well. So hopefully that's something that can come out of this. We do have, we feel an obligation, as with all of our forums, we have a number of competitors who join our forums. So we've never had an issue, but ultimately what this slide says is that we will not discuss anything of a commercial nature, anything related to competition, to commercial, to pricing. We've never gone near there. If you ever felt in our conversations that we did stray into a risky area, please raise your hand and we will stop that particular conversation. So I'm only going to give you one brief update on DCG, and I thought I'd do that with an image that we're going to start sharing on LinkedIn and in other forums. So really, we launched in terms of globally in Q4 of last year, and I'm very proud of the team. We've a growing team at DCG in different parts of the world. Probably the most important reference point that I just share here, and this is all you're going to hear. Well, at the end, I'm going to share one other update with you. But essentially, with the participation of many of you on this call and your teams all over the world, we have built what we think is a really strong level of intelligence around what brand manufacturers are doing to win across and to be successful across multiple digital commerce channels. It started with Seek in terms of our core capability. We launched the digital shelf optimization benchmark. Spent a couple of hours this morning already with one of our customers playing back those results and challenging them. Then we launched Amazon Europe, and today we're launching a new benchmark. So the headline from us is that thanks to the participation of our community members, we're building up a lot of intelligence around who's doing what, where, and why. On that note, I'm going to pass to Colin, who's going to lead the session with plenty of support from Chris, and hopefully Gregor's audio will be fixed. Colin.
Thanks, Declan. I'm going to be, when I'm talking, I'm actually reflecting many of the things I've seen in brands over the last 3 to 4 months across Europe and Australia. You've told me things face to face, and also the retailers that I'm working with as well. So we're getting two different sides of it's not just all brand that we're going to hear about. So yeah, the usual, I always start with definitions, and we know what we're talking about here, the digital advertising on retailer, e-commerce, and apps. Now, you'll see a point at the end where it says that whenever they come into contact with a brand, nearly always when I'm talking to either a brand, the first thing they say is, well, 80% of our distribution is actually through in the retail shops to the actual stores. And I just want to reflect back some of this point. This is obviously 1,000% true. And, you know, we want to be kind of tackling that. But the real issue on what's happening in store as opposed to online is the technology solutions are just really not there to go and measure it and to actually give decent inventory. As an aside, I was talking to Samsung on this, and Samsung are really getting very excited about actually the ability to send in screens and put screens in, lease them into retailers, and actually to then sell that as digital media inventory. But we're a bit away because all the solutions are not joined up. So whenever anybody talks to you about what's happening in store, we're still far away from it. So we focus mostly on digital. So that's our definition, and we know what it looks like. We're all very familiar with say Walmart, and we know what digital retail media looks like. As an aside, just some reflections on what I've seen recently. Some of the retailers are getting a lot more excited about offsite than on-site, not because they don't want to do on-site, but actually they've got very real e-commerce technical limitations on their platforms, and you know, they get very excited about their audiences and the monetization opportunities offsite. But what I will tell you is many of the retailers are trying to work all this through themselves, so they're not actually quite as up to date as the likes of Walmart or obviously Amazon or some of the big US retailers, because their platform always holds them back. But what's driving retail media in 2023? Well, the obvious thing is retail slowdown. We've had growth across the world of, you know, pretty high retail growth in the red there. This is from Insider Intelligence. And obviously, e-commerce was the hot thing right up as far as the pandemic. But even still, and you'll still see a lot of what I call idiots across the internet talking about how e-commerce is dead. But in reality, e-commerce has still got extensive growth headroom between what's happening in retail. Now, I think the reasons, and this is what I'm hearing directly from retailers, is they barely started on the e-commerce journey, particularly outside of the US. They've got to turn their fixed cost base, which is retail stores, into a more of a variable cost base, which is what e-commerce is. And so they're more bullish on e-commerce than what you would read in the press. But the issue is, as we know, e-commerce is expensive because you've got to build out facilities, you've got to build out these delivery capabilities. Interesting, I met a e-commerce grocery retailer in Czech Republic, Austria, and Germany. They cover those markets, and they were online only. And the bit that was very interesting is they built all the retail media capabilities from day one. And so those who are coming in as pure plays, building it into day one, I think that's a very exciting opportunity for any brands to think about, because their capability around delivery, their capability around inventory, and capability around monetizing that inventory is going to be much better than a legacy business, and you probably will get better results. Now, what's really going on in the world of retailer? I do this funny thing in fact, I did it last night in the London Business School. I asked all these MBA students, what are the margins for the average retailer? Did it with a couple of big brands across Europe recently as well. Nobody knows the retailer margins. It's quite interesting. Even like people paying 100,000 a year for their courses don't know what net retail margins are. And you can see they're pretty grim, and I'm not going up. There's actually no real visibility in retailers, a roadmap, I should say, in retailers for their margins to be going up. So they really have very few choices. And if we look at the quote from Carrefour, and actually Goldman Sachs, I know, are pretty much along the same lines as well, which is important as e-commerce is for Carrefour. The vast sums they need to expand online, the only way they can do it is to actually have retail media to offset those meaty e-commerce costs. And if you're a nerd like me and you sit through the analyst questions that chief executive retailers in the US are asked on their quarterly calls, you'll see retailer comes up. And in fact, I've got a quote from Walmart on that, which is an interesting quote, because Walmart are obviously they're excellent at retail media, but they use this very interesting line, which is they help keep prices low for customers. Not so sure about that, but they help us deliver an operating income number profit margin. Now, this is an interesting one. The analysts are talking to the retailers, mentioning retail media. What are you doing from the lens of what are you doing about margin? We don't like your 3%, 4%, 2% margins. We want you to increase your margin. What you doing about it? So to a certain extent, the retailers kind of have no choice but to go and do this. I'm dealing with one retailer in the UK right now. They do 2 billion purely online. And retail media is seen as a key growth driver for them over the next couple of years. But it's also to get them out of their low margin trap as well. So it's a very interesting dynamic. It's still very early doors in this, because retail media means a new language. And as I'm dealing with all these category buyers and dealing with a lot of individual buyers and retailers, they talk about the language of SKUs and margins and so on. They always have this language. They know about this. But then when you start kind of introducing kind of new thoughts around how we could be thinking about this mediation of say buying and selling through retail media, it's they just don't understand it. And I agree with them, because they're trapped in this day-to-day having to deliver a number. It's retail, you got to deliver a number every single day. So in turn, retail means new skills, new people, new responsibilities. And this quote that I found a couple of months ago is just very interesting. This idea of developing demand is now a shared responsibility between the brand and the retailer. Now, I use an example on this when I buried myself into the world of Procter & Gamble, and their CMO was talking about retail media, and buried it in one of these quotes. He talked about how they were using this automated sponsored search tool, which updated content and bids every few minutes with an API directly into the retailers. And they were saying, we're changing content, we're changing price every 50 minutes. It's 4xing our opportunity with that individual retailers. But he said, the thing that's interesting is increasing the basket size in the retailer, increasing the retailer's basket size. And that's what we mean by this idea of shared responsibility. The retailer is supposed to get people in the door and sell. But also now, actually through technology, the likes of P&G are saying they can increase basket size for that retailer. Now, the benefit of being slightly older and having started my career in merchandising and selling products into retailers, I can pretty much say that's pretty much the first time that's ever happened in my 25, 30 years of working in brands and in retail. So let's switch to the basics. Gregor, I think hopefully you've lost your Dalek voice and you can...
Yeah, can you hear me properly now?
Yeah, you're no longer sounding like...
I kind of like the other voice, but we'll stick with your normal voice.
I was telling you that I'm your father, but nobody was. Yeah, I mean, look, so from a manufacturer perspective, clearly digital retail media is a whole new world of opportunity. And there's a lot of pressure coming from retailers to invest into their digital retail media ecosystems and to get into that, get onto that space. And from a retailer's perspective, you can totally understand why. It gives them access to brand marketing spend. It gives them access to a pot of investment that they've never typically gotten into before, which can help enhance their margins, as Colin has already said. And manufacturers and retailers are seeing an increase in basket size, which is fantastic news for retailers, particularly in these inflationary times. So digital retail media is a real hot topic right now. The thing about it is, though, we need to make sure that we look before we leap as manufacturers. We want to be investing. It's new, it's shiny, it's exciting. There's a whole load of opportunity. But if we jump in feet first, we're going to come up against a whole load of problems later on that we're then going to have to try and reverse back out of. One of the biggest ones that comes up when I speak to manufacturers is this point around ownership. Who owns it? Which department owns digital retail media? Is it marketing? Is it commercial? Is it customer marketing? Where does it sit? Who's responsible for making it happen? And where does the budget for it come from? I'm going to redirect you back to Colin, because Colin put an absolutely fantastic post on LinkedIn about this yesterday. I really would recommend going in and giving it a read, because it explains this point absolutely fantastically. Maybe you can put Colin under pressure to share his thoughts on it later on. But we need to establish where ownership is going to come from, where budget is going to come from. We need to make sure that we understand our customer journey as well, particularly which digital retail media touch points our customers are most receptive to. There's a fantastic old adage of 50% of my advertising is wasted. I just don't know which 50%. We could go very quickly down the route of investing into media channels, media touch points that aren't relevant to our customers if we don't investigate and understand first. There's a very big question around the content and the creative. So who owns creating the content to begin with within your organization? But then also, do you have the effective creative in order to bring product to life on the digital shelf? As the number of manufacturers that are participating increases, the media channels and the eyeballs that you're competing for remains broadly the same. Breaking through is going to be more important than it has been before. We've got to go back to having wonderful, engaging creative that is relevant to your customer base in order to attract them and make your digital retail media effective in the first place. We're going to talk about measures and KPIs a little bit later on. I know Chris has a lot of views on measures, KPIs, incrementality, and things like that as well. So he'll talk about that shortly. There is a question over which resources. So do you have the right resources to be able to maximize this? It's one of those things of, you don't want to be doing this half-heartedly. You've got to do it properly. You've got to commit to it. So do you have the resources to do this properly? And then for me, there's always a question about, is this what you should be doing right now? Some manufacturers are still dealing with the brilliant basics of basic content for digital retail platforms, let alone then getting into digital retail media as well. Some still haven't managed to get through search optimization properly. In some markets, that might apply to your business. So before we throw ourselves wholeheartedly into this new, wonderful new frontier of digital retail media, we want to make sure that we've got all of the other basics right first before we add this on as well.
Gregor, just two observations on this as well as you're speaking. One on the creative side, there's because I see myself, if you ask me my trade, I always say I'm a marketer, and part of my sort of domain over the last kind of 10 years in particular has been getting in the world of creative, and because I've shot a lot of TV ads and what have you. And there's a whole new set of research proving about how ultimately creative is the bit that will actually separate you out. I know that won't come as a surprise, but actually there's now a lot more data to prove this. And we remember when Facebook ads came out originally, they weren't very creative, they weren't very strong, there wasn't really much differentiation. Hopefully we'll avoid that with retail media. However, on the other side, doing good creative in a small 1 centimeter by 2 centimeter, or sorry, 3 centimeter by 3 centimeter screen is very, very hard. And that leads me to the second point, which is I'm sitting in the room with the retailers as they're sitting, thinking through how they can do all this stuff. And what's going on in their head is like, wow, lots more new creative, lots more new workflow. Who's going to own it in the organization? And, you know, that's before they start talking about KPIs and then getting the business case signed off. So from the brand's perspective, what I would say is, do try and put yourself in the foot of in the shoes of the retailers, because the retailers are struggling with this as well. Each of those 6 points Gregor put up are identical to a certain extent in retailers. But let's look at some more things around content, because we just touched on content and creative there. Over to Chris. I know you've got some very interesting material there.
Yeah, no, and I think this ties nicely to what you and Gregor just kind of set up too. I know when we hear PDP or digital shelf, most of us roll our eyes because we know that stuff, and we know that stuff potentially, but the teams don't know that stuff. And unfortunately, that retail readiness that you always needed to have in store before you did a shopper marketing program is still true online. And then if you look at the performance of a media campaign and you say it didn't perform well, was it because the campaign didn't perform well in all the aspects of the targeting, the creative, and the design, or was it because what you drove to didn't convert? And on top of that, we'll get into measurement obviously in a minute, but it's also are we looking at apples to apples? Because the retail media campaign might have had very different objectives from a traditional campaign. But when we think about playing off that on another level is this idea of like full funnel content. Now, when I say content, that's not just PDP content, that's the media content as Gregor and Colin are talking about, and that creative. But I'm not here to say these examples are like, even though they all make me hungry and want something very, very early on in the morning, which will set my diet off wrong today. But well, I'm not saying these are perfect or these are the best performing campaigns in the world. They're the right approach. And full funnel content is really remembering that whatever you're running as the campaign should hopefully somehow tie to what you drove to, not just in terms of cool, creative, relevant product. I got to the product page, I'm ready to add to cart. That's fine. That's normal. But I see a lot of brands, and actually had a hard time finding examples of brands where you would see the ad, click on it, and arrive somewhere that actually reflected the ad you just clicked on. Now, I'm not talking about paid search where it's just the product shot and you go right to the product. But when you click on a seasonal ad and you go to a non-seasonal experience, it's kind of weird. And I use a silly example or analogy. It's like someone hoods you with a black hood and takes you out and drops you off on the side of the highway. You have no idea where you are. You're in West Virginia somewhere. And so the thing is, how do we tie creative in the media when it's more of a banner or merchandising or something that's a little more visual at a minimum to what we're driving to? And I just thought these were two examples. This is actually 2 years old, but I thought this was an awesome one from M&M's, who is a movie night relevant candy, but may not have, it's not that the product itself says M&M stands for movie night, munchies, right? So they had to make themselves relevant in their campaign and their promotion, because it was buy 2 big bags, get a video streaming credit. But what I loved is that second carousel image on the PDP that they drove to on Walmart was that promo. So not only did they not lose you in the where's the promo that I just clicked on, but they also made what was a everyday product a relevant one for the movie night theme. And they do a really nice job of just changing out seasonality and occasionality anyway. I thought the Super Bowl, and for anybody who considers football a different sport, that's fine. I'm not judging. But I did love that, again, you clicked on a Super Bowl ad from PepsiCo, Frito-Lay, and you landed on an experience that reflected the thing that you just saw. I did see, though, and this was maybe more of an issue with the retailers, to Colin's point, they don't know everything either, and they don't have all the same capabilities. The same approach from PepsiCo, which is generally amazing, couldn't deliver. I don't have a slide on this, but couldn't deliver on some of the other maybe like regional grocery players. So you click on the ad and you go to a page that didn't reference what you just clicked on. So some of this is going to be up to limitations of the retailer, but some of this is by design. This was another 2 sets of examples here. Not all of us have brands that have a celebrity endorsement or a celebrity founder, and that's okay. But one thing I noticed and still notice today is some of the big brand campaigns that are running that feature an influencer or a celebrity didn't get the rights. And usually it's because they didn't think about it to get the rights to use their likeness and their imagery on the product pages, right? So I would argue that Martha Stewart and Snoop Dogg are somewhat compelling as a pair and could maybe get me to want to buy that Bic Easy Reach Lighter, which is a cool product, whether it's for candles or for whatever else, right? So making sure, and again, this isn't maybe on you, this might be on the team that buys the rights for, you know, the licensing or the partnership. Now, Jessica Alba happens to own part of the company, so that doesn't hurt, but she's in the ads and the PDP and on their website. So she's a full funnel celebrity approach. It's not just like, well, yeah, I own it, but I'm not in it. If you're in it, be in it, right? And so we can't control all of that, but that's just, these are examples of things that you'll see a lot of times disconnected between the broader media campaign and the landing experience of the final point of purchase. The last example here on the next slide is just and this is a little bit different, but this is having been a brand manager myself prior to, you know, volunteering as tribute into e-commerce. Brand was everything, right? And everything was about the brand. And then yes, some of the products got featured, but when we think about the PDP and then tying that back to, or the brand stores, and then tying that back to the campaign, we even see this within PDPs, this kind of spectrum of like brand merchandising all the way to actual product merchandising. So when I'm actually on a PDP, I'm looking at the product, and the brand is a reason to believe. It's not the belief. It's the, well, that's why I trust you, right? That's why I believe you. And I'm not knocking Amazon Basics, because they obviously do pretty well, but you're on like the battery page. They don't even tell you anything about batteries. Like, but yet Energizer and Duracell highly educate me on batteries, even beyond what I need to know, because they're the experts. Whereas Amazon is just like highly rated products at low prices. Good luck. Like, whereas then you go to Lego on the right, who can't love Lego, right? Every single page and every single campaign is product specific. In addition to obviously having a really amazing brand, Lego is, again, the reason to believe that your kids are going to love it and that it's high quality and all that wonderful stuff. Nivea in the middle was just, I thought, a nice example who had product specific messaging and some of the advertising, but then it also used the brand and the broader portfolio as, again, complements to the story. But this is PDP, but like when you see, there's just a lot of like brand, it's almost like after paid search, we just get to brand marketing, and the brand marketing leaves you disconnected from the product marketing that you got to within one click. And so how do we tie that a little bit more closely together? And so again, there isn't one way to do full funnel. So, but obviously this gets to getting a cross team here to make sure that we realize we can build brands with retail media, and we can actually make our national media or global media more shoppable to tie to the same ultimate objectives, which we all need to be designing around, and then obviously measuring against with what metrics are available. So we're going to get more into the measurement part, but I think that is kind of an interesting.
I'm going to set our hosts a challenge. We're going to break a rule just for 5 minutes, because if we could be opening up 5 minutes from now, that would be great. So let's try to cover incrementality and the KPIs, even just the headlines, if that's okay. Brilliant. Thank you, Chris. Incrementality.
Everywhere you go, you hear people talk about incrementality. It's a sort of like the line that people fall into immediately. I've kind of sort of reverse entered this to when I'm talking to brands about this. And it's, if you go to the next one, there, Declan, I actually want to get, I kind of more challenge the brands now a little bit more. It's kind of a bit, it's not really fair. I mean, I know people don't have to do things that are fair, but like incrementality is also about the campaign that you're involved in, the creative, the call to action, the spend, the share of voice, and so on. And, you know, the world of marketing is obsessed with this book called How Brands Grow by Byron Sharp. And if you study all of that, what they're talking about is also about incrementality and growth as well. So this is like a murky waters you enter into when you just ask the question, what is incrementality? But also the measures that we are obsessed with, such as ROAS and ROI, don't also help us think about incrementality, because new to brand means a ROAS decrease. And we'll touch on that in a second on metrics. And of course, we all know metrics in the retail media game are not standardized. And these new channels that are coming through, we all seen the press releases on these, they don't have standardized measures. So I would say to the brands, don't be kind of use lazy language and say, oh, I'm only obsessed with incrementality. You need to be more specific, because I'm telling you, from the retailer side, they struggle to measure it too. They don't necessarily have the tools. So I think a better thing is to talk about it in a slightly different way. And Declan, on to the next one. If you think about each retailer having unique reach audiences and ad formats, think about the retailer's uniqueness and how the customer is getting to that. Like, for instance, in the UK, if somebody's buying something in Tesco, let's say shampoo, it's a totally different need to buying and journey to buying, say, in Boots. And therefore, you got to assess the shopper journey. And also, we sometimes don't define our goals. I spent a lot of time yesterday listening to brands and how they talk to this particular retailer. And the top brands are very specific about what they do, and they're kind of almost control freaks in this area. But what I'm hearing from some other brands, particularly in the last few weeks, that they weren't very specific about what they wanted. So set your market share goals and sales targets. And if you can, use these to reverse engineer your expected CTR and CAC. That's kind of a technical thing, but you can actually, through retail media, actually reverse engineer and create your own budgets once you start, after a couple of weeks, knowing what the CTRs are and CACs. Now, speaking of metrics, the metrics that matter, you will hear a lot of talk about ROAS, TACOS, and all the rest of it. And you, as the audience, are living in this world. So I tried to put up a menu of sample retail media metrics, I should say. So just in our heads, we should think about campaign metrics, optimization metrics, revenue metrics, and then results metrics. This speaks to this moment I mentioned a minute ago of incrementality. It's like, what bit of incrementality are we talking about? Actually, incrementality, for the most part, means the stuff on the right side, which is results-based outcomes. So I always like to have clear thinking, both when I'm in my kind of how I talk, but also in terms of when I'm talking to brands, to say, guys, which topic are you talking about? Don't just talk about metrics, and don't talk to me about, pure incrementality. It's like, which thing do you actually mean? Chris, before we wrap up, I know you've got one or two views on ROI and metrics. Do you want to give us a 30-second précis of that?
Yes. So there are metrics out there that can help us, even in a world void of perfect data or holistic data across all retailers and markets. There are some metrics out here, and naming them at least helps us know where we have gaps and whatnot. But I also see a lot of brands not designed for incrementality, right? So it's almost like, well, I don't get the data, so I can't get it. Well, that's like saying that a tree that falls in the woods that you weren't around to hear didn't make a sound. It did. And actually, you could go out in the woods and chop out the bottom of a lot more trees and cause more to fall while you're not there. So you can design, if you want to build bigger baskets, you can use media and content and portfolio to drive trade up or stock up or cross-selling, right? If you want to drive more repeat, you can use promotional programs like subscribe and save, and drive reminder messaging and remarketing to bring people back. Right now, again, it would be really ideal to be able to segment that out and go, oh, the basket building one worked really, really well. That was the driver of our growth. But if you really pick very specific objectives and don't try to grow in all directions all at once, but pick ones that are really relevant for your brand, your category. If you start seeing growth, you'll know that was coming from that very explicit effort to drive bigger baskets, because that's the only thing you're really trying to drive. And so obviously we want better metrics. We want clearer pictures so that we can know how well it's working. But I see some brands, either they don't do it because they can't see it, and I don't say it's ignorance. It's almost like I can't see it, so I don't even think about it. Or it's because I can't see it, I'm not going to do it because I won't know if I did it well. But you can design for incrementality. And that's to your point, Colin, just as the last point, is there are a lot of brands where you'll see the report come back from Walmart Connect or from one of the retail media networks, and they're like, here are your results. And you're like, well, what was I trying to achieve? And they're like, well, I don't know. You didn't brief me on that. And when you look back at the brief, they didn't even have the objective wasn't even about the thing that they wanted from the campaign. So like you said, the control freak approach might be the better one sometimes, just because you're going to be OCD about getting it. But it's brief, it's the planning, it's the activation, and ideally it's this evolving measurement space.
Brilliant.
Great. Let's open up to Q&A. Declan, you're the host with the most on the Q&A.
Yeah, we have some pre-submitted questions, but thank you. I don't know how you did it so well there. You blended those last two topics, so we pretty much met our target. So thank you, guys. I learned an awful lot from Gregor, Chris, and Colin, so it's genuinely exciting to have the three of you on the same call. This is where I put pressure on our guests. This is, it's time for your questions. Neil, I know you're not shy. You've probably got about 4 or 5 questions noted. But Eric, Doug, Nicole, Nick, good to see you. Who's going to ask the first question? We've covered a lot in 20, 30 minutes. Todd, you're not going to be shy with a question either. So questions, please.
Sure, I'll go. Colin, you mentioned retailers from the investor calls now, kind of the quarterly earnings calls, right? And I think retail media is discussed more on those. It's kind of gone away the last 2 or 3 quarters on brand calls, though. What's going to be the catalyst to really have the investment community focus on retail media, focus even more on digital? I mean, I've been just doing the word counts on the ones this week, and there's most CPG brand calls, the earnings call, have 0 mentions of e-commerce, 0 mentions of retail media. What changes that so it gets more topical and obviously then trickles down into brands?
It's interesting. It's a great question. I've been trying to think about this over the last while. And in fact, I'm pointing the finger at myself to a certain extent. So at the post-pandemic, you could argue that all that hype, all that kind of memes around e-commerce kind of like just died out. And maybe the media and the questions from the analysts are reflecting that the hype kind of died down. And that's kind of like just a kind of natural human thing. But the more I've been presenting, now this is, and I was maybe a bit of a sort of participant in that, if you will. But actually, the more I looked at this, particularly over the last 6 months, as I had to do a lot of presentations and so on, I went, hold on a second. My original thesis is correct. E-commerce is barely started. Retail media is a very long runway over the next 10 years because the retailers take so long to set up their thing. I know because I'm dealing with like at least 3 retailers at the moment. They're not outside of the US, they're not as advanced in terms of setting up the retail media networks, and they're starting to realize their ways of working is going to change. So I think that, and this is now we're in the world of subjectivity, Todd, which is, I think it's this nexus, this kind of crossover point between when the trade buyers are realizing they have to sell this a lot better. Let me give you an example. I know a bunch of retailers out there, and I know this will come as shock horror to you, Todd, that you just couldn't possibly believe this, that the trade people are giving media assets either away or giving them and charging a lot of money for them and not giving any data in return. And that to me is not going to continue. Specifically yesterday, I heard the exact phrase was, all of our brands are starting to, they're not using the word I use here because I use more colloquialisms, but they're starting to get very shirty with the retailer saying, you've been taking a lot of money off me and I'm not getting anything in return. I'm getting 3 lines in an email as to the result. So I think that's the kind of the next thing, which is whereby the trade folks no longer have any clothes. Yeah, the trade folks have to start delivering, and they're like, well, I'm not giving you any data, you're not getting any money. So that fight is going to be forced by retail media. That's actually, I'm speaking at a conference on this in a few months' time. It's called Navigating the Change in the Buyer-Supplier Relationship. With this is the key point. I think that's going to be it. Todd, you can go and say I'm a complete charlatan if that doesn't come true, but that's okay.
No, I think that's great perspective. And it's kind of spurred me to think about, go back and look at how long it took, just say like mobile phones to be talked about, right? Like that cell phones were going to be a thing, and kind of look backwards, right? And I think, yeah, the data piece is interesting, right? As brands, we have been rewarding some retailers with a lot of retail media money without the data, right? And will we be disciplined to stop that or not? And I think it's like, the Andrew Lipsom's done some presentations on this with like IAB and others.
Yep.
That trade spend increased when there was POS data coming out, when that wasn't a thing back in the day, right? And I think as retail media data does, hopefully become standardized somehow, some way, but also more plentiful to brands, maybe that changes the conversation as well. So no, appreciate the perspective, and thank you for all of this today.
I mean, we all know this. I mean, we're all adults here. The retailers take the money and it goes to the bottom line. Yeah, that's the way it is. Okay. And in a future world, how can we continue doing that when we know the technology is there? I liken it to SAP and Oracle financials coming on stream in 1990s, whereby you could no longer mess around with your financial accounts. Yet you were able to deliver on a day because you put money in and the accounts come out the far side, more or less. That's where we're going to with retail media, e-commerce, and marketplaces, because no investor is going to be happy with paying for somebody else's profit and pouring it directly onto a retailer's bottom line.
Right. Thanks, Todd. Thank you, Colin. Next question. Who am I seeing going off mute? Neil, Eric, Alberto, very welcome as well. Carlos, Helen, Neil, and Eric.
There's a question in the chat, Declan, if you wanted to go to that one first.
Thank you, Eric. Do we have an example? Do we have any examples where any CPG company have used user-generated video content for their media programs and got incremental ROAS? What are the pros and cons of it?
Do you want to read that out again? Sorry.
Sorry. Do we have any examples where any CPG company have used user-generated video content for their media programs and got incremental ROAS? And if so, what are the pros and cons of doing this?
I haven't seen it. I've seen some very interesting use of content through influencers, but not UGC.
Okay. Questions from
I think the content was regarded as retail media. Actually, I saw it in Turkey. They're incredibly innovative in Migros in Turkey, and they're doing some very cool stuff around influencers and live TV and what have you. And they're categorizing it under Mimeda, who's the retail media agency, under the game of under the arm of retail media. So yeah, but not to UGC myself personally.
Okay.
I haven't seen it either specifically within like a retail media context. Obviously, we're seeing some of that like social content infusing in, which again, low-hanging fruit are like the review-based, where some brands are using the reviews in the content and or in the media. And so it's less in the media, more on the PDP. I have seen some brands then doing like their own like consumer surveys where they're almost kind of getting like quantified reviews of like the performance of products. We know Target has been piloting their Instagram social content for your different products, although it's paid, you know, through the PDP. And then there's still this like kind of like as live streaming and other, you know, again, some like the Amazons and Walmarts try to bring that into the fold, but whether you're allowed to use that on in your media or whatnot, I haven't seen anything yet, but we're seeing there are all these like parallel paths of things that are likely going to drive more of that. The I don't want to say the con, but the consideration with that is, do you own the rights to the content? I mean, before you even test and learn with it, can you get the content? Are you allowed to use the content? Was it made for that? I mean, there's going to be a number of considerations, and then how do you build a pipeline of that, or at least a pipeline of content to consider to be leveraged and then tested and learned? But it's definitely something coming in a pipeline.
I suspect Doug might want to share something. Doug.
Yeah, I'll jump in and just so everybody knows, I've been on the CPG side, obviously, as a chief digital officer, if you guys know me, and been in digital for a number of years. But now I'm over on the software side and in with a role with Bizarre Voice that deals with user-generated content. So from a video perspective and using user-generated video within media, regardless of format, there's some experiments going on. A lot of the piping that and the guidelines from a legal perspective that Chris was just mentioning, those are more or less in place because of the ability to collect and curate content more broadly, whether it's text, visual, or video. So those types of things are in place. Has there been wide scale adoption and usage of it? There's a smattering of it. You particularly see it in health and personal care, beauty, but it's not a widespread practice yet. I can tell you, though, it is one of the things that's on the forefront of a lot of people's minds, because the impact of influencers and or regular consumers on conversion is profound. And so we get a lot of requests for a lot of new functionality in and around video. So that is a coming wave. And then the big pro to think about for you on the brand side is that it's far less expensive. So yeah, you got to get the rights, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But you can pump out huge amounts of content at very low cost, and you can still keep it on brand. And it's much more authentic. So we have tons of data around this if anybody wants to see it, but the video component of it is a coming trend.
Excellent. We let Doug in because he's a close advisor and associate of DCG's. So Doug, thanks. That's really valuable. Gregor, you'd have thought, and then I think Eric and Neil may have had questions. But Gregor,
very, very, very briefly on it. So if you look at Lego as a manufacturer, they have a lot of consumer-generated content which they then recreate themselves so that they can get past the ownership rights and things like that and post it in different places. If you go onto Amazon, you'll see a lot of kind of short video content that they have for a lot of their products, and a lot of that has basically been replicated from what their consumers have created themselves.
Great. And Todd has shared something there in a video. Abhinav, forgive me if I'm not pronouncing your name the correct way. You asked the question. Did you have any comments you wanted to share? You're off mute, but we are not hearing you. Sorry.
Sorry, Declan, was that directed at me?
No, so Abhinav asked that previous question. So I didn't want to know if, but we're not hearing his video. So Neil, in the interest of time, let's go to your question, and then Eric, if you do, yeah.
Sure, gentlemen, great presentation to condense a rich and interesting topic into 30 minutes. I like the framework that I think it was Gregor who presented at the start of the meeting with the 6 areas of retail digital media. There's a couple that we at Nestle have gone deep into, but I wondered already, but clearly there's shitloads of work to do in this area. I wondered, from your purview, where do you think brands have most opportunity to make a difference, knowing that you need to do all 6 of these things and probably some more stuff as well?
Let me get the visual up here.
Oh, I found past it. There we go.
That's a great question, Neil. You know, I'm kind of torn in my answer to you, so I'm going to answer it in 2 different ways. Yeah, because I'm seeing inside the retailers, and they've got exactly the same problem. They don't have the resources. They can't think through all the measurement. They know they need to deliver on content creative, and they don't have decent ownership. They can't get the cash in, and they haven't worked through the customer journeys. And so what they're focusing on is, you know, the money aspect. How can they get at least some proposition out the door to start kind of learning? And then they're kind of focusing on resources and content and creative. Their measurement are not their priority because they can't actually have anything to measure at the moment, particularly if they're booting things up. Yeah, it feels to me that content and creative would be, and I'm now drawing on my own marketing experience and people management experience. It feels to me content and creative will give you more bang for your buck, and thinking through source of budget will give you second kind of level bang for your buck, and then resources, I would say. That's, you know, and you could argue the toss with me in each of those 3.
Okay, great.
And in resources, you've got capabilities as well, right? Not just bodies, but bodies who know what they're doing.
Yeah, the bodies who know what they're doing is a very interesting one, because I've been lucky enough to sit through a lot of presentations from brands over the last, say, 4 months as well. And, you know, at the end of the day, it's about the fact that they're busy, they got day jobs, they might be doing something else, say on AdWords or, you know, another channel. It's not their sole job. And also, they don't necessarily get all the best data from the retailers. So the capabilities piece is not a cut and dried point that we can't go and say, hey, they just need to improve their capabilities. It's not quite fair on the people either.
Neil, thanks for the question. Gregor, again, you kind of put this together from what we've been learning about the last few months, right?
Yeah. So really interestingly, the statement that's at the bottom there, what you should be doing right now, it was originally a question, which was, is this what you should be doing right now? And my point back to you, Neil, would be, if you don't know clearly within your organization who it is that owns it, how you're going to pay for it, where you're going to target it, and how you're going to execute it effectively, I would argue it's not what you should be doing right now. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't be testing the water. It doesn't mean you shouldn't be doing test and learn. But having been on the commercial side, when Tesco's is coming to you and saying, you need to be doing our digital retail media, you have very little choice but to be investing in digital retail media, or you're going to be losing out in other ways. But at that point, you've got to figure out what is the best way for you to do it at that moment in time, based on where you are, who you are, and what resources you've got allocated to it. I think we've seen a lot of hot topics in digital commerce over the last sort of 5-10 years. Okay, so yeah, I'll take last mile delivery. So quick commerce was the hot topic at the start of last year. Advertising was everywhere. Everybody wanted to be on it. Lots of manufacturers jumped into it, spent a lot of money in it, didn't really get very much back for it in some cases. Fingers burned, and that was it. They kind of moved on. Whereas if they'd taken that very experimental approach to it, if they tested, if they'd learned, if they worked out how to do it for them, they could actually have created a very big sustainable business doing it. They've been prepared to adapt. So I think rather than jumping full on into it feet first, I hate using that slowly catch your monkey approach, because some things you've just got to do. But I think in this case, test, learn, experiment. You're a massive multi-market manufacturer. You can do different experiments in different markets simultaneously, learn lots very quickly, do a review, understand it, and then say, this is the approach that we're taking. And by the way, guys, this is who's going to own it. This is where the budget needs to come from. This is the journey that the customers are on, and therefore the touch points that we want to use. This is the creative that we're going to do with it. This is how we're going to measure it. Go away and do.
Brilliant. In the interest of time, we're not going to try to answer these questions now. What I might do is ask the guys to pool their thoughts, and when we share a recording of this forum, we will give you some context on these particular questions. Eric, was it just because I know you and I was just putting a bit of friendly pressure on you, or did you have any burning question?
I dropped one in the chat box. I do have to run in 2 minutes. Happy to start the conversation. But yeah, echoing everyone, I think a good amount of content in 30 minutes. I think we all know this is a place we will be spending. It's just around which platforms are we confident in making that investment with. So for us, it's really around creating some objectivity, creating the right resourcing internally so that we have the right people actually asking questions with these platforms. And then another one that comes up in my mind is, does paid search really become media anymore? Or is that just shelf space management online? So we're also rethinking the role of category management and the skills they need to have on the media front to help us drive some of these long-term category growth plans.
Brilliant. Before you jump off, why don't we give Chris, is closest to you geographically? We'll give Chris the opportunity to answer that question on paid search.
Cool.
So, well, I would say, I don't know if I have the answer, but I would say I don't disagree with you in the sense like paid search is really like it's part of the requirement to play on the digital shelf. It's the slotting fees of the future, if not the future being today. The question though, and Eric, I know we're dealing with this multi-siloed, multifunctional internal environment. We may have to talk that way to help the broader organization embrace this transition so that then they own it and then they help take it forward. But arguably any touch point is media, right? So I mean, if we want to like be a little theoretical, the shelf in the store is a touch point of media. How we fragment it internally to bring that seamless omni experience, ideally full funnel experience to a shopper to convert them and keep them, may have to take some behind, like the Wizard of Oz behind the curtain type efforts. But I don't disagree. I mean, paid search, why in some cases it's convenient to leave it in one function or maybe transition it to the future, how we manage Catman shelf management isn't wrong, because it's part of just showing up on shelf, but it is a critical part. Somehow we still have to tie back that full funnel planning, activation, and measurement internally. We're doing a lot of trainings on full funnel media strategy because the teams aren't talking to one another, and one team doesn't look at low funnel as part of brand building, and the bottom of the funnel is saying we've maxed out what we can do down here. We need fish coming down this stream so that we can catch them in the net. But I think that's an interesting. We have to make sure we never get caught up in the silo, even if, and maybe it's not a silo, but in the definition we give to help everyone else embrace it, that we don't get lost in that, because to the shopper, they don't know the difference between media or it's all one thing, right? So, but I don't know if that answers your question, but maybe speaks to it a little bit.
No, it's great, Chris. I think the question I actually had was more around, are you seeing on the retailer side standard setting boards and things like that coming in? Because I think what we're mindful of is everyone's grading their own homework. And so if attribution windows are different and the way we define ROAS is different, then it's hard to really look at it as media. So that's just another thing that I think our teams are hypersensitive to.
Eric, that's where we are at the moment. IAB are trying to do this across Australia, UK, and US, and I know in Europe, Internet Advertising Bureau, but like we're a few years away from that agreement. So everybody is going to be marking their own homework for a couple of years.
Okay.
Cool.
Brilliant.
Drop,
Eric,
guys.
I know you got to
Cheers.
drop. I'm going to steal the last 2 minutes or 90 seconds of this call. I don't think we can be, as DCG, accused of selling on these forums, but it is our forum, and we do have a very exciting announcement to make. Not coincidentally, we've launched, most of you have participated in most of our benchmarks. We've launched Seek, which is all about your broad digital commerce capability. We launched Amazon Europe, and then recently we launched a benchmark on global digital shelf optimization. So you're the first to hear publicly, and you'll see a lot more of it on LinkedIn, and we'll share these details with you. We are launching, surprisingly, a digital retail media benchmark. We're a relatively small business, as you all know, but we've got associates and people working across the world. So we're being very ambitious, as we were with the digital shelf optimization benchmark. We're really looking to address all of these topics. It takes a lot of work to get to the point that we're at. There are hundreds, thousands of questions. We've distilled it down to about 60 or 65 data points that we believe will be valuable to you as you're defining your strategy. So as we did before, we're going to make this easy for brands to participate. There's a foundation version, and then we have various different models where we run workshops and we deliver executive presentations. We are going to be partnering, obviously, with Colin and with Chris, and Gregor is leading this from a DCG perspective. So we're bringing in a lot of expertise, and in the spirit of the community, we hope that you'll all participate. We think there's a lot to be gained from it. These typically run for 5 or 6 weeks, and then we deliver output, and we brainstorm, we share results and scores, etc. So that's it. That's my 60-second update on where we're at. There's lots of talk in the industry, but one thing we're very proud of is, and consistently, we have no commercial or strategic association with any retail media networks, with any tech providers or agencies in this space. So anything you hear from us or heard on this call, it's impartial, it's independent, and we hope that you value that. With that, we're on schedule. I'd like to really sincerely thank Colin and Chris and Gregor. I learned a lot from these guys, and I hope you did too. And we will share a copy of the recording and hopefully see a lot of you in Shop Talk in Barcelona. I know, Neil, you'll be there. It's in your backyard. So thank you.